Okay, so listen, if you don't know what's happening on Wednesday nights, I just do this sporadically once a month, reminder. We have a Bible plan on our app, Calvary San Diego app, under Bible. If you hit Bible, you can find the plan. Under the plan, every day it opens up a new day. Every new day it opens up the next thing that we're reading. But spoiler alert, we're in Job, so you can jump ahead if you're needing that or wanting that. And it's about 2 to 3 chapters a day, no more. And we're going to finish not only reading, but kind of conversing around the Old Testament from 2024. So we are at halfway. It's July. We made it. We're past halfway, actually. And we're cruising. We're already in. So we got through some of the hard ones. Carlos got us through Leviticus really well. We hit the Kings, we hit the Chronicles. Those are, whenever Pastor Chuck Smith would teach the Kings and the Chronicles, you'd watch like church attendants like do this. You know, then all of a sudden it was like, if he's like, and then next month we'll start Revelation. Boom, you know. But it's just the way it goes. It's a hard one, but you did it. Congratulations, we made it. And we're in the book of Esther, and Esther is unbelievable. Fascinating. So let's start with conversation. Why is Esther so interesting? Anybody know or have some ideas or your own thoughts about it? Or yeah, let's start right there. This is the only book in the Bible God is never mentioned. No Elohim, no Jehovah, no God. It doesn't mean there's not God's. And we're going to introduce a word that becomes incredibly important. It's the word providence. You'll hear that word a lot in certain Christian circles. The word providence. It's a great and powerful word. Y'all know what that means. In essence, it just means the hand of God that is in the unseen. So it's the unseen hand of God in the known world, in the seen world. God working, but you don't see it specific to God, right? It's not like, Jesus said, go fill up these buckets with water, and then he turned it into wine. That's you see that. But like providence, the providence of God. God supernaturally and sovereignly working in the unknown, but it happening in the real world, okay? So no mention of God. That's going to be significant, okay? Really significant. And if you want to get into the why is God not mentioned, we're going to get into some realm that is unanswerable. We don't really exactly know why the name even of God is not mentioned. And even a better question, which by the way I don't have an answer, I'm going with questions right now. How did that get included in the scriptures with no mention of God? It's powerful. But we could talk a little bit about that in a second. But what else do you got? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, sovereignty is, okay, so what's the difference between providence and sovereignty? Very good question. Sovereignty would be can I use a couple big words here? I know you can all track, but I just normally don't like doing it. That would be the theological expression of God's knowledge. He is sovereign. It's not whether you see it or not. It's the fact that no matter what, like if you don't know something, God does know that thing. If everybody in the world, what's that great verse in the book of Romans? If every man is a liar, God is still true. He knows all things. He is sovereign. Providence is the expression of God's sovereign power in the world. It's the evidence of his sovereignty, though it may not be, you may not say, oh, that is attributable to God, but God knows it is him. Okay, good question. Okay, what else about Esther that's like fascinating or interesting? Yes, ma'am. She's a queen. Yeah, she goes from just girl in the town to queen. Yep, it's the princess story or whatever, the one nobody wants. But yeah, it's that one. Okay, can I mention something else? Every book of the Old Testament was discovered in the same groupings of caves of ancient texts except Esther. Qumran. Anybody heard of Qumran? If not, no worries. Qumran, you know it, is where we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were the papyri rolled up real tight in those jars that had been lost, we thought, and then it was discovered by a Bedouin kid in 1947. His goat fell into one of the caves, and he went in to get it. Started cracking open these pots because he's like, what's in there? What's in there? But anyways, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls, the most famous collection of scripture in the whole world, and probably the most robust. It was written by a group known as the Essenes. And the Essenes, there will not be a test. If you don't care, you can tune out. Think about baseball or whatever. It's no problem. But the Essenes were, so you know a few of the major religious groups of the day, but not everybody knows the Essenes. Think Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes. And then your fourth major group of those days would be the Essenes. For reference, many people believed that John the Baptist was connected to the Essenes because they were desert dwellers. They basically started the first kind of monasteries idea. They left their home and they went into the desert, and they started, in essence, monasteries, kind of. And they were faithful scribes. So a lot of them were scribes, but they were all about writing the scriptures down. Every book of the Old Testament is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not a full copy. Only one book that we have a full copy of, and who knows what that book is? Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. It's the only full copy predated BC. So we know it's BC. It's on one scroll, stitched together, so they stitched the papyri together. I'm saying this because when people, it wasn't, before 1947, the authenticity of, the historicity of Scripture was in challenge. How do you know that it wasn't, most people believed Isaiah was two Isaiahs. One really, early Isaiah and then later Isaiah, right? Early Isaiah and then later Isaiah was after Jesus. That was the assumption. Deutero-Isaiah. And the Dead Sea Scroll discovery blew that one out of the water. Because you can just watch, now I know we don't do it anymore. We don't write. Anybody still write? You write things? Okay. If you're a writer, I know if you're taking notes, right? How easy is it if you can take notes and you can go from one, you can tell even if you are writing another day, they can tell if your finger pressure has just changed. There's so many ways of knowing. There is no distinction in the book of Isaiah. It is the most important discovery of biblical artifact in the world. If they find the Ark of the Covenant with Indiana Jones, that'll beat it. But other than that, there is not in my opinion, there is not a greater discovery in the modern world. It's the Mount Everest. Because you can go today, you can go there and you can go look at it. They say it's the original. My guess is there's not a chance they're putting that sucker out there. But anyways, they say it's the real one, but I think that one's buried somewhere in some very, very safe, somewhere. But they say it's the real one, and you can just track it. And if you could read it, you could follow along, and you discover that there's, I believe it's 53 errors in that Isaiah from the new Isaiah that you could read today. If you could read Hebrew, if you had a Hebrew Bible reading Isaiah, there would be 53 letters different then than there are today. And of the 53, they're all just spelling changes from ancient language to new language. None of them are they're not word, like King James, when we didn't have W, we just had, everything was a U, or a V, and, in fact, in some languages, the W, the word for W is, in Hungarian, you say double V is the name of the W. There's no W, it's called duplave, and it's a duplave, umlaut duplave. So the same is true then. Our English has changed. If you read an old King James and a new modern, you'd be, that's completely, they're exactly the same. It's just that the language itself has changed and they adjusted the language. So it is the most phenomenal thing you'll ever see. And you can read every obscure Old Testament book, but not Esther. So that is a really interesting, and of course the question is why? Most believe it goes back to what Mario said. There's no mention of God. And so it's possible that the Essenes, in fact, I'll give you the few reasons why they believe there's no Esther in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Number one, the Essenes were all men. Not a significant book because it was non-Jewish in essence. It was Persian, okay? Now again, we have no evidence other than just, you get to know somebody long enough and you're like, yeah, they probably think this and that. So that's kind of, scholars believe that. Number two, no mention of God means not significant for them to do that. Number three, and probably, by the way, it could be all of these, but But this is a really significant one, very possible. It just got destroyed. The assumption that we have every scroll that could have been there is ridiculous. It was 1,947 years later, at the very least. The odds that things were destroyed that had been there are very high. So it's possible we would have had other books in that time, full copies, but we don't because it was destroyed. So does that make sense? I hope that helps. Is there anything else that you'd want to mention about Esther that you find incredibly unique to Esther? Yes, ma'am? Yeah. Yeah, he should have been. Right, yeah, that's a great one, yeah. Haman, the arch enemy of this book, should have already been destroyed, but here he is again, always trying to come against God's people. Fascinating, yeah. Yes, sir?
Okay, so just to be clear, Esther is part of the Torah?
Esther is part of the Old Testament. Yeah. The first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that's Torah. Yeah, good question. But only Jews cared about the distinction. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying only the Jewish faith distinguishes Torah from other books. For us, we take it as all part of the canon. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, okay, so Purim, the celebration of what happened, is still celebrated, is still a big part of the Jewish. By the way, that's another reason why they believe that Esther may not have been in the Essenes. And that, are you ready for this? They may not have celebrated Purim at that time. It might not have made it nationally. It might have been a little bit more regional. It may have been still working through. I'm not a big fan of that one. I'm just giving you all the different options that are out there. In the end, we're all going to heaven one way or the other. It's not going to do about that. But when we get there, those will be good questions. But that's an interesting idea that not all celebrations were, it's not a biblical, right? It's not in Torah. It's not in the first 5 books of Moses because it hadn't happened. And so not every bit of that. Now, here's an interesting one. The Maccabees' days was celebrated in Jesus' day. So there's it's just interesting. It's possible it was not nationally celebrated. And so they kept it out, but there's no way of proving that. So, okay, Esther. This is not a book that's as easy to do chapter by chapter, though I'll try to do that. The reason is because it's narrative. It's one of the easier books to follow along with, isn't it? It's a really, after you got through some of these other ones, you're like, Esther reads like a Judy Blume book. This is easy. I could bust this one out. It's just smooth sailing. Don't worry, the prophets are coming and you'll be back in a purgatory again. But no, it's not that bad. But probably the biggest theme of the book of Esther is the providence of God, okay? It's really, really important. It's probably the main message. If there's any message you want to walk away with, it's that God is providentially working in all things. Okay? Let me just get into, I try to give you guys kind of the types. Right? Mordecai becomes a picture of Christ. He's a type of Christ. He rises from potential execution to a position of honor, right? It's the picture of death and then resurrection and exaltation. But let me just go through each chapter. King Xerxes, actually, can I do one more thing really quick? And then it's going to be quick going through there. I wanted to mention this. At the same time as the events that are happening in Esther, Confucius just died. Okay? Confucius just died. And Buddha is just alive. So 3 major religions share a common history at that moment. Now, Confucianism just started going, and Buddhism would take a while, but just thought that would be interesting to know. This is the beginning of these 2 Eastern religions. Rome is on the rise. It's the beginning of the Republic. India just laid the philosophical foundation for Hinduism. So it's an interesting time in human history. By the way, it's also considered the golden age of the philosophers. So you're getting right into the 400, that mid 400s range, you're getting right into the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle times. So the world is fascinating in those days, okay? Depending on what translation you're using, the king's name is either Xerxes or Ahasuerus, or however it's said. I don't know how to say it right. There you go. That sounds great. Yeah. This king holds a lavish banquet in chapter 1. And his queen, Queen Vashti, refuses to appear. And so he gets his, okay, so the thing about the Persians and the Medes was that they were what we would call today law-abiding citizens. They were all about their laws. They're actually kind of epic when it comes to the introduction of like the rule of law. So they had things where like even if if a rule had passed, even the king couldn't overthrow that, which is what you see here in Esther. So even the king had no power. Like the rule had more power than the appointed or than the king. So Vashti would not appear. She would not show up at King Xerxes, big old parties. And so they worked this law to basically get her thrown out and get her banned. Esther chapter 1, verse 12, I'll read this verse. When the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come, and the king was furious, and he burned with anger. So this sets the stage for the rise of Esther. When we get to chapter 2, right, so the whole idea, so his people come together, his leaders, and they say, okay, let's do this. Like, let's ban Queen Vashti for her disrespect of her husband, and this becomes a law that no woman's allowed to disrespect their husband. So these guys were like using the system to their advantage. They're like, hey, if the queen can disrespect, then what is my wife going to do to me? And they use this as a way of kind of promoting their, total authority. And it worked. And the king just goes along with it, right? So then they have, in essence, in chapter 2, we read about Esther. She is a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin, Mordecai. And Esther, through a quite literally beauty contest, Esther is chosen as queen. There are some parallels between this and Daniel in the book of Daniel. In essence, a person exiled, a person not really given any choices. Daniel had no choice. You can believe whatever you want, but I'm telling you, Esther had no choice. And they chose, Esther's path towards becoming the queen. She chose gentleness and softness and quietness. And God used these things, and it really impacted Xerxes in the same way that God used Daniel to bring great change into Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 17 of Esther chapter 2, the king was attracted to Esther more than to any other woman, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head, and he made her queen instead of Vashti. By the way, when it comes to the idea of almost like it's not the right phrase, but I'll use it anyways, like a cultural appropriation. Like if you try to apply today's standards of how we treat people to then, you're just going to only be bummed. The world was not fair and equal in any way, shape, or form. And so, that's always a question people have is like, well, how could God let these kinds of things happen? I mean, Esther, in essence, was put up for lottery to see if the king liked her sexually. And then and you're like, what? And Mordecai even was like, let's go. You could be the next queen. And if you try to put that into I would never let this happen to my baby girl, you can't do it. It just is no way of connecting that world and our world. We just have to kind of read it and let it be what it is. But all of a sudden, a Jewish orphan is queen of, at that time, the greatest empire at that time. So the talk about a shift in fortunes, she's at the bottom, and now She's at the top. And now chapter 3 gives us a little bit more insight into kind of the backstory of what's been going on there. Haman, a high official, plots to destroy the Jews after Mordecai refuses to bow to him. Esther chapter 3, verse 6, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people and the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So this sets up the main conflict, okay? By chapter 3, we get to the conflict of, okay, Haman he's the bad guy. He's the one that wants to destroy not just Mordecai, but all of God's people, okay? There is most certainly, and I think the book of Esther reminds us of not only providence, but of evil in a unique way. And the unique way is this. There's really no easy way or good way to kind of describe this, but unless you attribute the demonic realm to this, there's no way to understand it. What is the animosity and hatred of the world to the Jews? There is no, there's no way to, like, there's not and I'm not justifying any hatred or anything like that, but like, you try to figure out like what makes, okay, like America, our problem was color. We let color define us. Jews are black, brown, white, Asian, they're everywhere. There's no distinguishing, now you could say, oh, they look a certain way. It's not, yes, some do, just like all of us look a certain way. Go anywhere in the world, and if you're looking for it, you could spot an American, like lickety-split. And whatever color we are, you could spot Americans. And that's the same for any culture. But so what is it in the world? What has been the thing that has made people consistently hate? And not just hate, but like really persecute the Jews. The only conclusion ultimately is just it's demonic. There's no other, kind of way of looking at that. And so the book of Esther is a real deep, deep reminder of how. So why does the devil hate the Jews so much? Yeah, because they're bringing the Messiah. Kill all of them, you got no Messiah. Always been hostility. Exactly. You're 100% right on that. So it's not just Haman against Mordecai, but this is like demonic. So again, no mention of the devil, but this is demonic. Influencing Haman, not only against Mordecai, but against the whole thing. Now, something I want to mention to you, because this is where it gets really interesting, right? How does Mordecai even get on the radar? It happened in chapter 2, right? At the very end. Do you remember that? There was a plot, and Mordecai discovered it. And so now Haman is like, okay, yeah, I got to get rid of this guy. This guy needs to die. Okay, so we get to chapter 4. Mordecai urges Esther to use her position to plead with the king for her people's life. So Haman is creating a scenario where all the Jews, all the people of the land of the Medo-Persians can attack the Jews and kill them. Rough them up, beat them up, do whatever they got to do. Right? This is the idea. And Mordecai becomes aware, and he then says, Esther, I need you to go before the king, and I need you to let him know what's going on, and we need you to be the one that could, potentially rescue us. Verse 14 is not only key, but kind of one of those verses we've all heard. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. One of the more famous Old Testament verses, it's right there. Mordecai looking at the events. And again, isn't it fascinating that there's no mention of God right there? Like, what an opportunity. And yet, again, I can't tell you the why. I just know he's not mentioned. But Mordecai says, maybe this is the moment that you're here. Maybe you're here for this moment. And help can arise. Again, what a great opportunity. He could have said God would do something, but he doesn't. He says, help could arise. Help could arise. But you and your family will be gone. And so this is a huge moment, right? Because what's the reasoning? So why is there such big animosity? Why is there so much concern? Again, we all know this story. That's why I don't need to overplay this thing. To go before the king without being invited could be a death sentence. Now, we can sometimes overplay that. Like, he always killed people for that reason. That's not true. The point is nobody came before the king unless they'd been invited. That's the main point. It's not that if you, let's try it and hope, fingers crossed, maybe he won't kill me. In essence, the idea was this. The king would call you. You didn't call the king. You were invited in. You didn't invite yourself in. So the risk was if you invite yourself in, it's possible that he could kill you. And so Esther goes in. And again, we see so much wisdom, so many moments where God could have been mentioned, but he's not. And we're reminded that God wants to use human ingenuity, creativity, intellect, and wisdom. God never asked you to turn off your brain when you became a Christian. In fact, if he could say something out loud, he'd say, please keep it on. And because the whole message of Christianity is we're disciples, right? What are disciples? Followers of Jesus, not graduated, but always following. You never graduate the discipleship of Jesus, but you keep on learning. So it's fascinating that, Esther goes before the king. He welcomes her. And then what is her request? What does she ask for? She asked for a banquet, that he would come to a banquet, right? She doesn't say, hey, king, your closest advisor wants to kill me and to kill all of us. She says, hey, king, I want to invite you to a banquet. I want to get you off of the throne and into a more, I want to make this more familial, a little bit more friendly, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit different, right? So, Well, this is what's going to get very interesting, isn't it? Verse 8 of chapter 5, if the king regards me with favor and it pleases the king to grant me a petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to my banquet, and I will prepare for them, and I will answer the king's question. Because the king's like, well, why are we having a banquet? And Esther, she's smart. She's like, well, it's a surprise. Well, I'm the king. Tell me. Well, I'm the queen. No, And what a person who has everything wants the most? Intrigue. Adventure. He can have anything he wants, and she won't tell him. And whoever says no, right? Who says no? Nobody says no. And so it's got his interest. He's really excited about that. Chapter 6 is amazing. King goes to sleep, and he has a bad dream. It's amazing how many of these weirdos had bad dreams. Nebuchadnezzar, King Xerxes, and then they like to tell everybody about it. And I think the point is not they were just a bunch of weirdos, like I said. I think the point is actually that they had the kind of nightmares that were truly terrifyingly altering. It wasn't just oh man, that was a bad one. It was this is crazy. And so he couldn't sleep, right? He's unable to sleep. And so he had somebody come and bring the book of the records of the Chronicles. I mean, narcissism at its greatest. Hey, somebody bring the book of all the awesome things I've done. And they literally bring the book of his rule. And while reading it, they read about that plot that Mordecai discovered. And then the king, now fully awake, realizes, oh my gosh, what have I done to bless Mordecai for his salvation, for his rescue? And so, and it's one of those great, I would love to have seen Haman's face. Because Haman's coming in, and he's coming in from a big party where he's like, I was honored by the queen. He's at home gloating. He's at home going, oh my gosh, you guys, he's telling the story. He's retelling the story of all the cool things that had happened to him at the queen. Because the queen, this is the queen. She's the queen. And the only two people she invited was the king and Haman. He's like, oh, you guys, I was there. This was amazing. I'm in the epicenter of power, fame. He's riding on top. And he can't sleep, and he's coming back in because he thinks he's the top dog now. And the king says, hey, who's in my court right now? Oh, hey, Haman just got here. It's like providence. It's all that timing, the providence of God. And he's, hey, get him in here. Hey, Haman, what should I do for a person who has done something great and I need to honor this person? Who do you think Haman was thinking of? Of course he was. What do you think? That's what narcissists are always thinking about. He's like, I think you should put on the robe of one of your robes. You should put him on one of your horses. You should ride him around. You should have somebody ride him around town. This is the man, This is the guy. Basically, everything Haman wanted, he put in there. Haman didn't need power, he didn't need money. He wanted fame. And so he's like, do this and do this and do this and do this. And the king's like, yes, I love everything you're describing. I want you to do that for Mordecai. And that's the moment when you could hear the music go dun, 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 or something like that. That's the literal moment when Haman went from like just bubbling with joy to literally like, I'm a dead man. I mean, can you imagine? This is literally one of those great moments in where, like in New Testament times, you could describe the difference between happiness and joy. His happiness was like way up. And then in a second, he is down. Look at verse 10, or I'll just read it. Verse 10 of Esther 6. Go at once, the king commanded Haman, get the robe and the horse and do as you suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have commanded. I mean, in essence, like you almost want to see the book of Esther like this. Now, this is unfair to say because we don't really know much about. King Xerxes seems to have been a pretty powerful king. But this really seems to be about two people's intellect fighting each other out. It's Mordecai and it's Haman. You have two people kind of working behind the scenes, right? You have Mordecai working behind the scenes for Esther, and then you have Haman working behind the scenes for, I would argue, the devil. And they're both like kind of like, they would describe themselves as king makers, right? They're behind the scenes, pulling the strings. Esther, and I give a lot of credit to her, where she may not have had that wisdom because she's younger and all, she was faithful. And that's a really great quality, And Mordecai could have been wrong. He wasn't, but he could have been. But she trusted. On the other hand, you have this guy Haman who's obviously risen to power because he's highly intelligent, highly ambitious, but they're kingmakers. They're behind the scenes. Okay, chapter 7. The king and Haman come back, right? Because she said, they're like, tell us why we're having a banquet. She already did it. She goes, no, come back again the next day and we'll do this again. I mean, you want to get people in power to just be at the tip of your fingers. This is how you do it. She's just dangling it out there, the carrot, and then she just keeps pulling it back in. Like, why are you doing this? Why are we having these days? And why are we having these moments? And so she brings them all in there. Verse 2, on the second day at the banquet of chapter 7, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition? Whatever it is, it'll be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom. Have you noticed, by the way, in the Bible, kings love to say that phrase? Right? Herod, I'll give you up to half the kingdom. It was just that phrase that people used to say, there's a limit, but it's a lot. I'll give you a lot. Like, I don't know how we would compare it today, but we still will say half the kingdom, right? It's an idea. So listen to this, verse 3. Queen Esther answered and she said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, but my enemy would never compensate for the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus answered, and he said to Queen Esther, who is it? Where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? He's sitting right next to him. It's so cool. This is like such a, I wish somebody would make this movie, but not a Christian group, please. Just, no, come on. It needs more violence, and, we need No. No, I'm just saying, like, yeah, it needs like a mixture of gladiator and, and the Bible story. But yeah, I mean, you just could see how cool this would be. Esther said, the adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman. Haman was terrified. The king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. So the king's ticked and he has to cool off. Haman stood before Queen Esther and pleading for his life, he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he now assault the queen while... He's like, are you trying to take advantage of my wife? You want to kill all her people and now you're trying to take advantage of her in my own home. I mean, oh, could it have all happened as fortuitous as this? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. I mean, literally, the king didn't have to say off with his head. All the people in there knew, homeboy's got to die. And then one of the eunuchs said, look, the gallows are 50 cubits high that Haman had made for Mordecai. I can't imagine how terrible it would be to be executed at the very place that you were planning an execution for your mortal enemy. And the king said, hang him. And they hanged him on the gallows. Now, here's where it gets kind of, well, that's awesome. But here's where it gets fascinating, yeah.
Why does NLT talk about being impaled on a stake?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Just the Hebrew's little fuzzy.
I think it must be fuzzy because, yeah. So the Persians invented crucifixion mildly. The Ninevites were a little bit more on top of that, but a lot of the idea of crucifixion comes from them, so it's possible that it was a mixture of both. They hung him, but it could have been a hanging, like a crucifixion type hanging, and then they... But actually, the great question is it's an unknown. It's not clear. Their form of execution is not clear in the Hebrew in that context, so... Super cool, though. So he gone, he dead. But there's a problem. And what's the problem? Law had already been passed. Right? We talked about that, the law. Okay. So chapter 8. The king gave Queen Esther the house of Haman and the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king. Verse 1, for Esther had told him how he was related. The king took off his ring, which he had given to Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the whole house of Haman. I mean, talk about a reversal here. It's craziness. She now falls down at his feet, the king's, and implores him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite. So in essence, what they did is they used law in their favor. They sent out a new law that said, hey, we can't stop that law. It's the law. It's going to happen. But we have a new law. Jews, rise up and fight. And anybody who wants to help them, you can rise up and fight. And if you beat them, you can take what they got. It's yours. I mean, this was like looting at a national level. It was like legalized looting. And so does that make sense? So when the day came, hey, this is the day. Go ahead and kill any Jew, beat any Jew you want, but also know the Jews can reciprocate. There's just like a bloodbath all over the whole region, the whole empire. But the Jews are victorious. Chapter 9, verse 22. As the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. So you have to try to it's hard to do this in the quick way that we're doing this, but you have to try to imagine there was this building of, we're about to die, we're about to die, we're about to die, we're about to die, we're going to die. I would almost, and most Jews, most modern Jews, equivocate the story of Esther with the Holocaust. It's a very common, you will commonly, among European Jews, you will commonly hear her story and the story of Haman and Mordecai, very popular among Jews, especially survivors of Holocaust or during that time. Why? Because there was a the early years of concentration camps, most people didn't know what was happening. But as the war went on, it's again, you got to remember, think about the 1940s. The first televised war we ever had was the Vietnam War. So pre-Vietnam, you got the news that the news wanted you to get. You didn't have independent sources in there, for better or worse. You got, it was probably better then still, but you got what you got, right? So imagine, like, most Jews, and like I've talked to many Holocaust survivors in Hungary, will tell you, the early years, you didn't know it was coming. You only knew you were being rounded up, and like now everybody goes, why would you go into those ghettos, you dummy? Why would you go into that? You should have fought then. You could have, No, you're thinking then, this is what they were thinking. You're thinking, by going into there, I'm showing I'm not a threat. You don't have to hurt us. I'm no threat to you. This was how they thought. But as the war went on, it became more clear. But by then, they're all locked up in these ghettos. So like, again, I can use Budapest. Budapest was one of the last ghettos, and the largest grouping of Jews that lived through the war were in Budapest. But Auschwitz, we all know of Auschwitz. Auschwitz was built to destroy the Hungarian Jew. So if you go there, you can actually see it's a whole memorial to the Hungarian Jew, right? Because they were the ones that lived the longest. What's the name of the dude that created the concentration camps, the German psycho? No, not Hitler. Goebbels. Goebbels. He lived in Budapest for a while to move the extinction. So you have to understand, for years and years, people were hearing like, we don't know what's going on, we're not getting the news, we don't know, we only are told what these people are telling us. And then all of a sudden it became clear, this is an extermination. And by then it was too late. That is the story of Esther. You have to understand, you have to see it that way. That's how they understand it, and I think it's a really fair parallel. And the parallel is simply they were saying this. This law was passed, and everybody thought, well, it could be bad, it could be nothing. But the core of that law was meant to eradicate the Jews. Most Jews around the region, they didn't know it was for that. They just thought, we're going to be harassed, we're going to be killed, we're going to have to hide, we're going to have to do it. They didn't know this was meant for their full and complete destruction. And in similar ways, I mean, in the last century, we've seen that same exact thing happen. And so, I have a very, very dear friend. He's in his 70s now. He's our, Roni, my buddy Roni. If you went to Israel, those of you that went to Israel with us, we were with I call him he's not mine, but we've been friends for 15 years. He's a tour guide there. And I always ask him to be our tour guide because he's Hungarian Jew. But he doesn't speak any Hungarian, but I forgive him for that. But his family all came from Transylvania, where Count Dracula, it's a real story, real castle, terrifying, and that's Hungarian. That part, it's now Romania, but that was Hungarian. So he comes from that part. And he was telling me, again, just side note, and then we're done. He's telling me that what's interesting, he is of the generation, he's the first generation in his family to have been raised in Israel. They moved there right after Holocaust, and actually even during. Some of them escaped during, but his family came afterwards, and there was like 50 cousins and all, and like 3 survived. So one of those kind of stories. But he has lived his whole life in Israel, and if you know an Israeli Jew, they are fighters. They fight, they claw, they attack. You see it. They don't take anything. They fight. There's been a war in Israel since 1948 every decade. By the way, the 2020s was the first decade they didn't have one. So look how well that went. Every decade. And he fought, since the 60s, he's fought in every war. Because, he's just prime age. So he said to me, my dad, has a tattoo from a concentration camp. And he says, my dad and I never got along our whole life. And he said, my dad was just quiet. He would never talk to me. He would never say anything. He had no emotion. And, it's just not the way we are. At any rate, I'm making a long story too long, but the point is he said it wasn't until I had kids and my kids started asking questions that my dad, now an old man, would start sharing his own stories. He said the Jewish nation has struggled to really, truly care. They will give money and provide citizenship and housing for Holocaust survivors. But if you go there, and I've actually gone and gotten to go preach the gospel in Holocaust survivor, they still have camps, not like concentration camps, but like these are old. I mean, dude, they'll all be dead in the next decade. And there was a Christian ministry running that, and so I went and actually got to share the gospel. And it was actually all Hungarian Jews, so I got to do it in Hungarian. And so it was super fun. And most of these people hadn't heard Hungarian in 40, 50 years. It was really, really a fun experience. And they all felt the same way. Their kids have no relation or understanding of them because their kids were fighters. Their kids were given weapons. Their kids were given tanks. Their kids were given guided missiles. They had nothing. And the kids always disrespected the parents. And you want to know why? Because they're like, you were wusses. You didn't fight. They never understood each other. And the grandkids are the ones that actually bridge those gaps for them. And there's been a lot of healing in these years. Now with this new war happening, it's changed that again in a really positive relational way. The reason I'm saying this is to say this. The concept in the beginning of Esther of people rising up to fight, they were just resounded the fact that if they even tried, they would be killed for trying. If you even tried to do something, it's so easy to sit on the other side of a first world military might and be like, just fight. But the idea that you could do that didn't exist. And yet, God somehow in his sovereignty worked these things out. And chapter 10 is just about the advancement of Mordecai, that God blessed him. He was second in the kingdom. And I think the book of Esther is a beautiful reminder, well, one, that God can turn things around just like that. Providence. You know, the bad day. I love when Jacob, you remember when Jacob thought he had lost everything and he's like, all things are against me. And little did he know that in just a matter of moments he was going to find out that his sons were alive. And not only were they alive, but Joseph was thriving and was going to bring rescue to the people of God. And so I think sometimes, sometimes we're kind of like exaggeratory. I know none of you, but sometimes all things are against me, right? And then I don't like that. It's not true to say, oh, no, that's not true. No, it might actually be true. It's kind of wrong. If Javi's having a bad day, he's like, man, this is like the worst. Oh, no, come on, it'll be okay. That's not true. It might not be okay. That's not a right thing to say. But I trust in the providence of God. Does that make sense? It's okay for us to be honest with each other. Oh, Mario's like, oh, man, it's been a terrible season. It's going to get better. This is not Annie. The sun will come out. We don't have to do that. We don't got to be negative Nellies. I'm not saying that either. But I'm saying, I don't have to say it's going to get better. We feel like that's our Christian obligation. That's not true. But you know what is our obligation is to say, I'm going to believe with you in the providence of God. Where you lack that faith, that's okay. You're allowed to. May God give me faith for you right now, and let's pray that through. Don't you love when it says in James that if somebody's sick, call the elders and let them pray? And whose faith does it say matters? The prayer of the righteous. The elders' prayer. The righteous prayer. Not the sick person. God isn't like, man, I would have healed you, but you didn't have faith. Oh, no. He's fine with anybody's faith involved. And by the way, when there's no faith, case in point, Lazarus. Lazarus, dead, no faith. Mary, Martha, no clue. The disciples, clueless. So there was no faith involved on that day. So it's not even true to say you have to have faith. Okay? I don't even believe that. That like, if somebody has faith, God's not like, please, somebody, come on, somebody. He doesn't need none of this stuff. However, God loves when we believe him. And so, if I'm not believing, but Art is, and I can just lean in on Art's faith. That's an acceptable version of Christian community. That when I don't believe, I can just lean on somebody else's faith. That's okay. I can trust, and in the process, God will restore mine. So, any questions on the book of Esther? Any questions on what we've been in? Whew. This is when I need like Jeopardy music playing. Da-na-na. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this, in the beginning of the book, it talked about how Ahasuerus, or however you pronounce it, had all of these provinces, outlining his power, how big a king he was. Well, wouldn't you think
Yeah, he did. Nah, you didn't want one of your harem to be your queen. And I mean, can I just be, it's kind of crass. He's just looking for a younger girl. It's called midlife crisis a little bit here. No Corvettes back then, you know? No, yeah. No, and I mean, by the way, we don't know that he was old like that. But midlife could have been 30, you know, because these dudes didn't live that long anyway. So not sure about his age exactly. He was in the prime of his reign. And I would venture to say that midlife is similar when you have everything. You quickly are bored of everything in your life. So it's like, these guys were like, hey, let's send out a beauty pageant. Because he's like, he could have any one of those harem anytime he wanted. Like, was Solomon ever really happy with 700 concubines? It's like, it's insanity. Just utter insanity, yeah. Yeah.
So in chapter 2, Esther keeps her nationality a secret.
Yes.
So it seems like Mordecai was aware that the Jews were persecuted at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point, Mario. Yeah. There was already, and that's to the point of like, Jews were already on the down low, flying under the radar in as much as was possible. It wasn't, I think Mordecai's concern was it could work against you. No reason for him to know that. You know, I think it was also a bit of a nationalism, and not a bad version, but a bit of that like a good Persian. You know, and Esther was. She's born and raised. She's a local. But yeah, there's already deep animosity. And you know, again, like I said, it's the history of, we just, you know, as we were driving, going up to Central Coast, we listened to a book on like certain parts. It's a new book on the city of Budapest, but it's on the history of it. And it was amazing how many different times they kicked the Jews out of that city because they were like, just to persecute them. No reason why. Like the belief was that they were, you know, spoiling the land and like corrupting the water wells. And, you know, the plague was their fault and this was their fault. It's, you know, I think one of the reasons Jews are constantly persecuted, and by the way, I still think it's demonic, but I think it's because they've discovered ways to keep thriving even in persecution. It's like they hate, this is a classic, and the guy actually said this in the book. The officials of Budapest hated the Jews, but they loved their business mind. It's like, yeah. So obviously it was the same then too. It's wild, man. That kind of hatred. Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, Michael.
So Haman goes against his own advice to Esther and admits that he's a Jew. But if he hadn't done that, the plot wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
Because Haman wouldn't have known he was a Jew.
Right.
So
Crazy.
that's even God's problem.
Oh, all of it. It just has all these layers of providence that you go, wow. Just the timing and the this and that. It's incredible. 100%. 100%. And Haman was a what? Anybody know who Haman was? Agagite. That was supposed to be killed. Right? He was an Agagite. Oops. In the movie? I didn't see the movie.
In the movie, it was the pregnant wife.
Oh, it's extra biblical. Right? That's not. Yeah. Did she have blonde hair and blue eyes in the movie? Okay, thank God. Okay. Jesus and his blonde hair and blue eye all the time just drive me nuts. Yeah. Dudes in the Middle East, blonde hair, blue eye. You know. Any other questions on Esther? We're going to start the book of Job next week. It will be 2 weeks. We're 2 weeks in Job, right? Yeah. Okay. We're going to be in the book of Job. Job's a big one. But so you won't have been up to where we are, but you'll get close. But I think that's a great book. Most people haven't read it, and that's okay. We all know certain things about it, but we haven't read it, and this is going to be fun. So, what'd you say? He never stops. And he has amazing friends that won't shut up. It's amazing. It's an amazing, and you know, we believe it's at the same time as like Abraham. So we're actually going back in time when we go to Job. We're going way back. So. And out of Israel. No, yeah, we're not in the land of Israel anymore. So fascinating. So All right, well, you guys did so good. I'm so proud of you. Well done. And let me close this in prayer, and then make sure you hang out and talk to people before you bounce. And yeah, Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the time that we had together. Thank you for worship, Lord. It's so good to, we just love that we get to start off and just stopping and saying that you're good, and we love you, and we need you, and we believe in you. And I pray that, Lord, the book of Esther is not just like an informational book for us. It's not meant to be like an infomercial. It's meant to remind us that you are providentially working in each one of our lives. That there are things unseen that will soon be seen, and that it's you doing it. And I think, Lord, so much of our job as Christians, so much of our pursuit should be to see the things that you're doing. And so I pray that, Lord, that I'm just thankful, Lord, that we have this book that like they didn't even talk about you directly, but you're all over it. And we see that, Lord, that there's just, we have to confess that like there's so many times in our life when like you're not the active part, like we're not thinking about you actively, but you're still working. And so we thank you for that, Lord. Bless your people, I pray, in Jesus' name, amen.